There is a moment in the final hours of King Saul's life that almost nobody talks about. Not the battle, not the Philistines closing in on Mount Gilboa, not even the sword falling. There is a scene, the night before all of that. A scene
Most readers
so
skip
desperate
past it, uncomfortable
and so
with what
strange
it reveals.
that most readers skip past it.
Because Saul did not die
Uncomfortable
because
with
he
what it
lost the
reveals.
battle.
He died because
That
of
scene
something that had been
the
happening
key.
inside him for years.
Because Saul did
not
not
because
die
he
because
lost a battle.
He died because of something that had been happening inside him for years. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
If this kind of deep Bible study speaks to you, subscribe right now.
Subscribe.
We dig into these
right now.
texts every week,
We dig
and you
into
do not
these
want to
texts
miss what is
every
coming
week.
next.
And you do not want to miss what is coming next. Most people remember Saul as Israel's first king, the tall,
So the Sunday school
handsome
version of the
young
story
man from
usually
the
goes
tribe of
something like
Benjamin,
this.
who
Saul
started well
disobeys,
and
God
ended
rejects
badly.
him, and David is chosen
The Sunday school
instead.
version goes something like this. Saul disobeyed God, God rejected him, David was chosen instead, and Saul spent his remaining years consumed by jealousy. That version is not
Because
wrong,
it turns Saul into a
but it is
cautionary
dangerously
tale
incomplete.
about one or two
because
bad
it turns
decisions,
Saul into
when
a
the actual
cautionary
story
tale
is about
about
something
one or
far
two
more
bad
subtle.
decisions.
It is about the difference between
the
two
actual
Hebrew
story
words.
is about something
When you
far more
understand these
subtle
two words,
and
the
far more
entire arc of
devastating.
Saul's life snaps into
It is
focus.
about the difference
And when you
between
understand
two
these
Hebrew
two
words.
words, the entire
And when you
arc of
understand
Saul's
those
life
two words,
snaps into focus.
The entire
The
arc
first
of
word
Saul's life
is shama.
snaps into focus. The first word is shama. Shin, mem, ayin. It means to hear, but not merely to hear
a
as
sound
entering
your
your
ears. In Hebrew thought, shama
thought,
carries the
shama
weight of
carries
hearing
the weight
that leads
of
to
hearing
action.
that leads to
To
action.
truly hear in the biblical
truly
sense
hear
is
in
to
the biblical
obey.
sense
When
is to
God
obey.
speaks and a person
When
shama,
God speaks
something
and a person
changes in their
shama,
life.
something changes in their life. The word appears over 1,000 times in the Hebrew Bible, and nearly every time it does, something is
Samuel
at stake.
uses this exact
covenant,
word when he
command,
confronts Saul after the
direction.
disastrous affair with the
Samuel
Amalekites.
uses this exact word when he confronts Saul after the disastrous affair with the Amalekites. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. The word translated obeying there is shama. Saul had heard the words.
Saul
He
had
simply
heard the words.
had not let them change
The
him.
gap between reception
The
and
second
response.
word is qashah.
He simply had not let
It
them
means
change him.
hard.
The second
stiff,
word is qashah.
difficult.
It means hard,
But in the
stiff,
context of
difficult.
the heart,
But in
it
the
describes
context of the
something
heart,
that has become
something
rigid,
deeper,
resistant,
It describes
unable
something
to
that has
bend
become
toward what
rigid,
is true.
resistant,
A hardened
unable
heart
to
in
bend
Hebrew
toward what is true.
not primarily
A hardened
failure.
heart in Hebrew is
It is
not
a
primarily a
structural
moral failure. It is
It
a
is what
structural
happens
one.
when a
It is what
person
happens when a person consistently
consistently
chooses their own
version
version
of
of reality. We often
over the
filter
one being
reality through our
spoken to
own
them.
preconceived notions,
And this
resisting
is the
truth when it
secret
challenges
hidden
our
inside
perspective.
Saul's story.
This is exactly what happened to
His
Saul.
tragedy was not one act of disobedience. It was a pattern of qashah, a slow calcification of the inner life, a heart that, over time, lost its capacity to truly hear. Watch how it unfolds. In 1 Samuel 10, when Samuel anoints Saul and sends him out, the text
In
says the
1
Spirit
Samuel
of God
10,
came
when
upon
Samuel
him,
anoints Saul
and he was
and sends him out,
changed
the
into a
text
different
says
person.
The Spirit of God came
The
upon him,
Hebrew
and he
is
was
stunning. He was given another heart. This is not a metaphor. In the ancient world,
In the
heart
ancient
was
world,
the seat
the
of
heart
the will,
was the seat
the
of the
mind,
will, the mind,
deepest
self, the seat of
Saul
the self.
begins with a new heart, genuinely open, genuinely receptive, but almost
genuinely
immediately,
open,
the cracks
genuinely
appear.
receptive.
In 1 Samuel 13,
But almost immediately,
facing the Philistines
the cracks appear.
and watching his army scatter in fear, Saul does not wait for Samuel. He offers the burnt offering himself, a role reserved for the priest. When Samuel arrives and asks what he has done, Saul does
When
not
Samuel
say,
arrives and
"I
asks
was
what
wrong."
he has done, Saul does
He
not
says,
say, "I was wrong."
"I
He
saw.
says, "I saw. I felt.
I felt.
I thought.
I
saw.
thought."
I felt.
The verb pattern in his answer is
revealing.
Every sentence begins with his own perception, his own reasoning. He had heard the command. He had simply decided
his circumstances made him the exception. That is the first hardening.
Then comes the Amalekite incident, and this one is worse. God tells Saul through Samuel to destroy everything.
Nothing is to be kept.
Nothing is to be kept. Saul defeats them, but spares the king Agag and keeps the best of the livestock. When Samuel arrives, Saul says, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord." 1 Samuel 15, verse 13. Notice what he does. He does not lie about what happened. He redefines what obedience means so that what he did counts as obedience. This is qashah
at its most refined.
The heart is now so hardened, it cannot even recognize its own resistance. It calls disobedience faithfulness. Samuel's response is one of the most devastating passages in the entire Hebrew Bible.
Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, He also has rejected you from being king.
1 Samuel 15, verse 23. The word translated rejected is the Hebrew ma'as, to spurn, to refuse.
It is not primarily about punishment.
It is not primarily about punishment.
A heart that consistently refuses to receive.
It is about correspondence. A heart that consistently refuses to receive cannot be filled. A life that keeps rejecting cannot be guided. What happened to Saul was not arbitrary divine abandonment.
Then we arrive at the night before his death.
It was the natural outcome of a will that kept
the Philistines are massed
itself.
Against him.
And then we arrive at the night before his death. 1 Samuel 28. Saul is terrified. The Philistines are massed against him. He inquires of the Lord, but the Lord does not answer him, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. 1 Samuel 28, verse 6. 3 channels of divine communication, all of them silent. Not because God had abandoned Saul the way a father slams a door, but because a heart that has spent years refusing to hear
King of Israel,
eventually loses
by God,
the capacity
sneaking through the night
to receive.
In disguise, visiting a medium, asking
Silence
a dead
is not
prophet.
always punishment. Sometimes it is simply the sound of a closed room. So Saul does something astonishing. He disguises himself and goes to a medium at Endor to summon the spirit of Samuel.
He cannot receive from the living, so he goes
this is
looking
the scene
for a voice
most
from
readers
the dead.
rush past. But sit with it. Here is the King of
Because
Israel,
you did not obey the voice of the Lord,
sneaking through the night in disguise to ask a woman who practices divination to call up a dead prophet. Every element of that sentence is a measure of how far the
A long period of years went unacknowledged between the Amalekite decision and the night at Endor.
He cannot receive
not
from
Goliath,
the living.
not the offering.
So he goes looking for a voice from the dead. Samuel comes, and what Samuel says carries no comfort. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord,
but
and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. 1 Samuel 28, verse 18. The Amalekite decision again. Not Goliath, not the offering.
And slowly, decision by decision, he hardened it against the voice that was trying to shape him.
That is the wound that never healed. Not because
and
God
the terrifying
held a grudge,
thing is that he was
but because
always
Saul
able to
never
explain
actually
why.
faced it.
There was always a reason,
A wound you do
always
not
a
acknowledge
circumstance,
cannot
always
close. Here is what stays with me about Saul. He is not a monster. He's not a villain. He's a man who started with a new heart, and slowly, decision by decision, hardened it against the voice that was trying to shape him.
Before you assume the silence is about his absence,
And the terrifying thing
ask whether
is
there
that
is
he was
something you
always
have been
able to
calling
explain
close
why.
enough for a long time.
There was always a reason,
Not because
always a
God is keeping
circumstance,
score,
always a
gradually less
logic
able to
that
receive,
made his version of
but
events
because the
sound
heart's choosing
reasonable.
itself.
Qashah does not announce itself. It grows quietly, in the space between what we know we should do and what we tell ourselves
A daily
is close
returning
enough.
of the will. Posture.
If you are in a
the
season
story of
where
Saul
God
does
feels
not
silent,
end in failure,
I want to
so
say
that we
something
can feel
carefully.
superior to him.
Before you assume the silence is about his absence, ask whether there is something you have been calling close enough for a long time. Not because God is keeping score, but because the heart that keeps choosing itself eventually becomes less able to recognize anything outside itself.
Not a warning about
Shama
dramatic
is not a
rebellion.
one-time act.
A warning about the
It is
slow,
a posture,
quiet,
a daily
entirely
returning of the will
plausible
towards
drift.
something larger than your own perception of what is reasonable.
The story of Saul does not end in failure so that we can feel superior to him. It ends the way it ends so we can recognize ourselves in the early chapters, while there is still time. That night in Endor, crouching in disguise, asking a dead man for what the living God had already been offering, Saul is not a warning about dramatic rebellion. He is a warning about the slow, quiet, entirely plausible drift of a heart that kept hearing and kept not quite obeying.
The story of Saul does not end in failure so that we can feel superior to him. It ends so we can recognize ourselves in the early chapters.
Even one word.
While there is still time.
Share it with someone
That
who
night
feels
in
like
Endor,
God
crouching
has
in
gone
disguise.
quiet in their life. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who spoke to Samuel, who anointed Saul, and who never stopped offering his voice, meet you in whatever season you are walking through.